So we're going to talk about webinars. We're going to talk about Omnichannel. We're going to talk about Shaman, obviously. We're going to talk about Livestorm as well. What are we seeing here? I guess the main message is HCPs, they don't have time for you. Essentially, that's the main thing to remember. But let's dive into that. What do you think?
Well, I think that content marketing, which is something that is well spread across, I think, almost any industry now, I think this was actually invented in pharma, right? Already in the 70s, 80s, we had sales rep running around with educational material, promotional materials. And there's obviously a big need also for HCPs to get educated, to learn. But we feel that today content is broken in pharma. We still see that HCPs have a need to learn and get new data and information. But from the numbers, it looks like pharma is not always delivering. There is a kind of an overkill. I'm not saying there's not enough content, right? There's probably enough email to fill a lot of email boxes, but it's about the relevancy about that content. So it's not more, but it is how do we actually find valuable content that our customers care about?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think very few industries where actually there is this feeling of being burned out essentially by the content. You have obviously the healthcare industry, but also on some level, the restoration industry is also the same. Those are people that don't have time. And especially when you send them an email, they won't check their email until the end of the day, or maybe very small window during the day. So essentially you have to make sure that the content you create is 200%, 300% relevant, very rich, and actually will be mindful of their time. So they will be able to consume that content, maybe on their own schedule and also on a non-trappy way. What I mean by that is they're not going to answer a call. They're not going to answer an email. So it has to be on their own term, which is very specific also to that industry. And at the same time, which with the counterpoint of that, and the really good thing as a marketer is that they're actually obligated on some level to attend that content, to get that content for accreditation, for points, for whatever they need to consume that content to be trained. So you have this big lever as a marketer that they have the obligation to consume a content. Now the goal is to make sure that your content is actually the one that they're going to see. And that's the whole key here. They are burned out, they don't have time. So it has to be on their own term, and it has to be rich, it has to be authentic. And I think that's what the data is saying here.
I think the key question here is, what then is high quality content, right?
Yes.
What is the content that is truly valuable? And we see that a lot of our customers, they spend time often on a global level to create content that is valuable, that has new insights, that is quality, that has quality. We see a lot of our customers that have in-house global scientific communication department. Sometimes they are too much geared towards internal communication, right? Would be helpful if that can reshared as well with customers. We have the congresses, etc. So from a global perspective, the organizations are really trying to get that content. But as a local marketeer, what can you do as a local marketeer? Because not like a lot of industries, you can just create a blog post, you can get a pen and start writing. It's highly regulated, obviously.
Absolutely.
And I think here your platform, or any other platform that you can do webinars with, becomes highly interesting for local teams.
That's exactly it. And that's exactly what the second side is saying. So basically, as you said, call, so opinion leadership type of content is highly evaluated. As soon as you get, it makes sense, right? As soon as you make an authority content, because you have a person that actually knows what they're talking about and actually recognized by their peers, and you're not the one delivering the message, it hits bullseye every time. Then video over text, much richer content, much more value in a short amount of time. So that makes total sense. And also you mentioned webinars and webcasts, because this is probably the best way to consume a video while also being able to actually interact with the person. So it's not entirely passive. They can actually interact, ask questions, answer polls. They get more value, you get more interactions, more engagement, more qualification on some level. And that's a win-win situation here.
So, Gilles, as an expert in webinars, right? Do you have specific tips on,
Yes, I do.
how to get that interaction with HCPs going?
Absolutely. So basically, this is the data that we gather from the whole healthcare and life science industry across the different customers that we have. We share a lot of customers with Shaman, but we talked about it, right? Educational, practical tips, something that goes very much into concrete use cases. ASAP is definitely the way to go. In terms of promotion, 3 to 4 weeks. Try to schedule ahead, and if you're interested, actually, we do have some timelines on the Livestorm website. You just type in your webinar date, and then we generate the whole promotion plan for you. In terms of pure data set, also Tuesdays and Thursday. This is where the audience is available. And actually, this is not very specific to the healthcare industry, to be honest. It's across many industries, unless there are something specifics. Tuesdays and Thursdays are always the winning. And to be even more precise, end of the morning and around 4 5 p.m. in Europe, specifically at the end of the day. Those are the really big spikes of usage that we see on the platform. Don't forget the email reminders, don't forget the invites, etc., etc. Also, attention span, it's getting shorter and shorter, obviously, because of all the different formats that we have, but also because the people in HCPs, yeah, they don't have time. Again, it is a very delicate audience, and 30-minute max. Actually, it's even less than that. It's around 23 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, actually, attention duration is 23 minutes, so it's even lower than that. And try to sorry, have a sort of conversational approach, pretty much like I think what like we're doing now, right? We trying to treat that as a podcast almost, because I think it's easier to listen to something that has a rhythm, and I think there is no better rhythm than a conversation. And even more if that conversation is between peers and people that actually expert in their own field and able to educate you on something you're interested about. So yeah, and I think the last data point is the replay, right? We talked about it earlier. Those guys, they don't have time, and they're gonna wait until probably the end of the day, even being home, to consume the content that you sent. So it's really on their own term, and don't negligate the replay, the transcripts, everything that basically is the asynchronous version of the live. This is also something very valuable for that population. So I guess this is a very condensed tips of everything about webinar for that industry. Does that make sense? Does that correlates with what you see, Moise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is also from data that KOLs and also local KOLs is something that a lot of HCPs have an interest in. And yeah, it's something that you can produce pretty quick. It's not very
Yeah,
expensive. You don't need that much time to prepare.
absolutely.
One thing you mentioned when we were discussing about this the other day is some tips around getting HCPs to talk, to chat, having cameras on, yes or no. I
Yeah.
think you made an interesting point there.
Yeah, I think it's if you're able to create conversation. I mean, I've seen I've seen customers, for example, that actually it's very small webinars, right? It's around like 30 to 40 to 50 people, so we're not talking about hundreds of people. And what they do is actually interesting. If someone has a question and it is an HCP, to value the person, to value the question, to even create even more interactions. They bring them on stage, just like we would actually bring someone on stage here to ask the questions. It's very engaging. Not everyone is okay to do that, but it's a great way to create some sort of authenticity and an actual reason to attend the live stream. So it's there. And also, I think it comes down perhaps on the next slide. I'm kind of anticipating, but the video format and the webinar format in general is something you can really repurpose. So treat it as a core system, like a medium that then you can replicate and recycle as you wish into different forms of content. But I'm kind of spoiling things. So let's go to the next slides. Let's talk about the whole journey, right? And that's more your ballpark, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So we see customers doing a webinar. This can be, again, on a local level, but it can also be on a regional level, right? I mean, with English in Europe. And it's not about the webinar only, but it is about turning that into, let's say, an omnichannel campaign. And this is where you run into everything needs to be approved before it goes out. So orchestration is more difficult. You want brand consistency. You want to tailor to the tools that sales reps in pharma specifically use, right? And so, yes, I think this is where Shaman comes in. So, obviously, we don't create these kind of content, but we can use and reuse this content. So we can, to your point, once we have a video, we can chop it in smaller parts. We can use it in a CLM. We can use it on a web page. We can have some gated and some non-gated videos. We can even take a very small portion and put it in a GIF, which can then be
That's
in
a
an
great idea.
email, for example. So just to be have a little bit more animation and try and trigger people to click that button, right?
Actually, give me the opportunity to ask you is something that I've seen on the slides and I really don't know. So where where do you arbitrate between gated and ungated content? You know, what is the rationale here, and when do you choose to get a content, and where do you choose to not get a content?
Well, that's a good question. There is obviously a regulatory portion, right? I mean, do you talk about brands? What kind of information do you share? But there can also be strategic or marketing reasons. So you could actually want people to register because getting people on your HCP portal can be quite hard. So you want to make it super simple, and especially first registration is hard. So you can do this together with the sales rep, or you can work with unique codes that you can store in CRM and then share with people in an email. So they just need to enter a 4 or 6 digit code. So it's all about making that step really
Yeah.
easy to get in this gated portal. So there can be reasons where you really want to trigger people to take that step and get onto the portal, and that could
Hmm.
be a reason to have like a more general information or an introduction non-gated, and then if you want to see more, it's basically a
Yeah.
teaser of them getting in.
Yeah, I was going to say that, just like a teaser, and that gives you an intent for giving a more thorough content afterwards. How do you, I guess, also the answer is inside the Shaman product, of course, but how do you segment population based on webinar engagement with other mediums, and how does that work? Do you any sort of do you advise on doing any sorts of segmentation in the tool?
Yeah, absolutely. And also you can have webinars with multiple speakers. And this can then be a great ingredient where you say, okay, we have some topics for this segment, and we have other topics that we think that maybe another segment is more in interested in, or you could even chop certain parts that you want as a promo, and you highlight more scientific view or a patient-centric view or whatever. So obviously it's about the CRM and the customer, how they organize this and what segments,
Yeah.
what information they have basically to segment on. A very simple segmentation for video recordings would be: did people attend? Did people register, yes or no? Did people attend, yes or no? I mean, this is
Yeah.
already something, the data you could get from your webinar platform.
You can
But
even go
obviously,
even more granular. You can say if that person attends, 20% of the webinar, it's probably not the same level of qualification as someone that
exactly.
attends 80%. Also, even for not qualification purposes, but maybe certification purposes, since this is also very specific to this industry, I had customers asking for a way to deliver automated certifications based on a certain degree of attendance, which is possible through the API and a bunch of things on Livestorm. But also, it is totally possible with just having a CRM and an omni-channel platform like Shaman. So, for example, again, I'm just talking about Livestorm because this is on the only example I know, but we connect to Salesforce, we connect to Viva, we connect to HubSpot. And what you can do, for example, on Salesforce is say, okay, my webinar is a campaign. I think on Viva, it's pretty much the same thing, but the object is called a campaign. And for each campaign, for each webinar, you will have people contacts. So basically the people that register that will be listed in that campaign. And then you have basically field that says attended, not attended, how much time, blah, blah, blah. And since Shaman sits on top of the CRM, it will consume the data. You'll be able to segment, to trigger emails, to trigger notifications, whatever medium you want to use, and then have something that goes on a very that is very granular in the way we want to address them, and heavy personalization as well. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe to talk you very quickly through these steps, right? Before the webinar, obviously it starts with awareness, and typical tools in pharma are email, because although people receive a lot of email, it's still a highly useful and converting channel.
Hmm.
Approved email is typically what sales reps send out, and you could work with all levels of customization. So you could work with different fragments, for example. You could work with custom text, which
Hmm.
basically gives a kind of a pick list where people can select one introduction. How am I going to introduce this webinar to you, potentially depending on your persona or on your segment?
Yeah.
You can have free text, stuff like that. So there are some items specific to approved email on how you can personalize. Then
Okay.
on mass email, a lot of customers work with Marketing Cloud, and here you have dynamic content. So you can basically,
Hmm.
based on CRM attributes, include this block, that block C, for example.
Yep.
Once you have that awareness, obviously engage, right? And I think something that people do not think about a lot, but is using the web, because many customers, the web is a pretty static tool. Landing page is a concept that is not very often used. But of course, taking people from that email to a landing page where you can maybe run a short video, where you have a form and you can have all of that interactivity that you don't have on an email, makes a lot of sense. That's why we have a landing page builder for that. And also the CLM can be used. So the CLM is basically the detail aid, and you can also make this pretty interactive. So you could iframe a form in there, for example, so you can register people right when you visit them. Or there are tools. We for example have a tool where you can do some polling, so you can ask questions in front of the event, and then the HCP will see what other people have answered as well, which is kind of the trigger why you should do this. And then you can start the conversation. But you could also use this information into the webinar, for example. So instead of thinking about this as a one-time activity, think about it as,
Yeah.
what can be done pre-webinar and then what can be done post-webinar.
That's a great point, because often what we see is people ask the questions, they ask the poll. I mean, the polls could be just within the webinar, and that's it, and that's what we're doing now today. But you could actually enrich the people that you bring to your webinars through different mediums than webinar, which seems completely counterintuitive, but actually works. And as you said, you capture through registration forms, other forms, other polls, and that also gives you a way to tailor the content on some level and say, if there is a lot of interest on that specific point, you can spend some more time on that specific part of the presentation. You can answer questions beforehand, before the end of the webinar, by just capturing those before the event. So it's actually very smart to enrich during the whole process of planning, organizing the webinar as well. All right. One thing you mentioned here on the slide, and I never really got my head around it because it is a very specific audience. You mentioned social media. Is social media so important for HCP in general? Is there specific ways to address social media in general for those?
Yeah, I think it is, and it depends a little bit on the where you are in the world. And some countries have specific platforms, or they have specific groups, right? So there's not a golden rule, but definitely this display and social media absolutely has a place, and I think a growing place. We are at the moment building and content authoring with light video, including light video and image carousel for instant messaging. So that is a platform that is really getting more interest. And yeah, a lot of doctors like to use that as well. So depending where you are in the world and what you are actually allowed to do and what the cultural differences are, there's a lot of opportunity in social and instant
Yeah.
messaging. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so I want to be mindful of the time. I think we have two things to cover before jumping into Q&A. People, if you have questions, feel free to either put them on the chat or use the question tab. Don't be shy. We'll try to answer everything at the end of the session. All right, so regional case in sharing recordings. So
Yeah.
I think that's something on your side, right?
Yeah, I wanted to bring like a real case from a customer on doing this at scale. And maybe this is also in part answering Simona's question that I see over here, and the fact that it takes a lot of time and resources, which is that in this particular case, a customer of us, they do on a regular basis these table discussions with multiple KOLs talking about specific topics within the disease area of the product. And these recordings can be shared throughout Europe in this case. And what is important is that you think about how to do this in a scalable way. So you create, for example, templates, you create modules inside the template that you can very simple add or remove depending on how you want to do it. Basically, you prepare a package for the countries. And then using a platform such as us, you can auto translate all of this on the fly. You can say, okay, I want to do this with mass email. I want to do this with approved email. I want to do this with email fragments. I want to put this in my slides. So depending on what channels are used in your particular country, you can pick up those modules and put them in those channels. And since we're integrated with Viva Vault, you can then also quickly start the MLR process, which is also linking to for example, a global document that has already been approved. And if you take an approach like this, you are actually able to do something really fast, right? Like getting an email out within a week in 10 markets is what we did here. And that can also be sometimes really important, because if it takes too long, if it takes 3 months, it's old news, right? If you after
Hmm.
3 months are going to say, oh, here are the recordings of this great meeting that happened 3 months ago, you're too late. So
Yeah,
I think there's is also a merit of being fast here.
yes, absolutely. Also, I think to the case of localization in region in general, I think maybe that's actually the next slide. So I'm just not sure I want to spoil that. Okay, no, I'll cover that a bit later on. But we have a lot of requests about localizing content. I think that's something that is very true for pharma because they have customers pretty much everywhere. And that's also a way for them to basically centralize the content on one place and then diversify the content by just translating that into different languages, into different languages. So either you do that live, and we have a partner that we use, it's called Interprefy, and basically you can do some dubbing, real-time dubbing on the language of your choose. It can be done by a human, can be done by an AI, can be done with subtitles, anything.
Nice.
And that's a way for you to basically very simply go beyond the borders, I would say, and make the content even more accessible and expand the reach of the
Yeah.
content.
Yeah, that's a great extension. I mean, it really depends on the market. What we see, like in Northern Europe, sometimes even on purpose, they want to keep every communication just in English. But the more south you get, it helps to translate and get things in local language. So
Absolutely.
yeah, dubbing AI, subtitles, that sounds quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So next up are a few examples of what we just talked about, right? Do you want to comment that, or because we've
No,
seen those are examples of
go
just
ahead.
emails and stuff. Yeah. Okay, I think we can pass that, to be honest. I think that's fine. So those are mainly the key takeaways, right? So opinion leadership, maximize for relevancy, great content, orchestration, expand your reach, expand your engagement. Because at the end of the day, it is the authority, the authenticity of your content that will make people stay and make people engage with you at the end of the day. Repurposing is what you just talked about earlier, right? Making sure you can create teasers and GIFs and whatnot, and trying to put that into different platforms and different mediums. Start with video because this is the richest content you can find. One thing we didn't talk about actually is you can do something very simple. You just remove the video layer, keep the audio, transform that into a podcast. That's just easy reach. And I'm pretty sure that someone that goes home after a long day spent as a, I don't know, in a hospital or a clinic, going on a metro, they're probably going to maybe listen to that podcast. Maybe it's far fetched, but I think that's a easy repurposing strategy for whatever content you're going to produce.
I think you just gave yourself a new product idea.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and
Well,
just replacement, right?
we do see quite a bit of podcasts within our customers. So it's definitely a medium that is. I mean, I've been a big fan for many years, but I think it's getting wider attention at the moment, and we do see more. I think you need to make sure that it's there's the good pace and everything, because
Yeah.
you miss the visual aspect. But no, I think the repurposing also to a part is the answer to Simona's question, which is okay, this sounds all and good, but it takes a lot of time and
Mm,
resources. But I think that when you repurpose these things, you can actually months of fun with the repurposed content. You don't need to do this every week, right?
yeah, absolutely. And then to the rest of the takeaways, distribution, self-service content. We talked about having templates, scripts, on demand, gated, non-gated, et cetera, and obviously measuring, right? We provide data as a webinar platform, but also you as an omni-channel platform, you provide tons of engagement data through other mediums. If you combine all of that, you put that back in a CRM, and out of a sudden you have a really big profile, very granular data on the people that have engaged with you, and then you can just create your segmentation on top of it, and then you can you know basically reach your goals. And so before we jump into that, actually no, let's do that now, and actually after that we'll answer the Q&A. So to conclude, it was not planned, it was actually a pure coincidence, but I mean, great time, great minds think alike, I guess. We are all going to be meeting Shaman and Livestorm in Berlin on October 15 and 16. And we'll be at the Pharma Summit, Effectiveness in Digital Marketing and Pharma Summit. And we're going to be basically talking about what we just talked about. And if you're interested, you can meet us there. I guess you're going to have a booth, or you're going to have, I guess, a stand. We'll have one. If you want to book a meeting with us, there is a link. If you want to book a meeting with Shaman, there's a link as well here on the side, on the post that Pauline just published. So feel free to book a meeting before, and I'll meet you all there. Are you going to be there yourself, Maurice, or is it your team?
It's yeah, no, I'm not gonna be there. It's people in my team.
Okay,
I'm already planning to, but that's end of year, to go to Viva Summit in Madrid.
nice.
So I'll be
That's a
I'll
big
be there
one.
for sure.
All right. Okay. 35-minute mark. We are a little bit longer than we were expecting, but let's dive into some of the Q&A here. So the first one we just covered, well, actually we didn't cover this one, but here it is. So Iliana is asking, are there any options that Interprefy for live dubbing subtitles? Because on Zoom, for instance, you can add an interpreter, blah, blah, blah. Speaker, any integrations? If not, it's fine. I'm just interested and love today's session. Great. Thank you, first of all. And no, so actually it has to go through an option because it is a partner built integration. So we need to have that separately. To be very honest and transparent with you, we're actually looking into building something of our own. Interprefy will still be there to have a human interpretation, but we're actually thinking about building a AI interpretation as well to make things a little bit easier for our users. So anyway, if you're still interested, please reach out. That was more of a Livestorm questions. And question here from Simona, this is the one we actually tried to cover a little bit earlier. So the problem is really creating the content engine. It takes a lot of time, resources throughout planning, and mostly the pharma are not equipped for this. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you don't have to actually look very far to find topics. You have obviously the news, regulations, and that's a big niche of news. And we have, for example, a lot of customers in the banking industry, and half of the content they produce is basically news about whatever is happening on the industry, regulation, new products, new legislation, that sort of thing. And that's a big worry, a big topic of worry, and a lot of people are interested in that type of content. It can be news on new technologies, new practices, that sort of thing. Also, product, services, stuff that you're already working on and you want to share that with your team or with your audience. Sorry, it could be partner enablement as well. So that's another type of topic. And also look for customer support requests. If that's something that exists as a pharmaceutical, if you have any sort of people reaching out with questions or problems or complaints about services, about products, this is a huge niche of topics that you can actually cover as a marketer to educate people. Actually, I was reaching for on our own analytics while I was hosting this webinar, and I wanted to share. So it's anonymous customer. I'm not going to share who it is, but this is actually a big pharma that hosts webinars on Livestorm, and I can share some of the type of webinars they're hosting, and then might give you some ideas. So they have live webinar series. So it is series about device specific topics. So they have product line with different devices, and they do series per device. And it is a very recurring systemic type of things where they present and present over and over the same products. That's very specific. I'm going to talk about it, otherwise you know who it is. And also there are webinars about optimizing a certain device and certain practice. So it's more of a training than presenting the product, so more training on the product or educating on advanced usage or advanced service associated with the product or services that the pharmaceutical provides. So you don't have to think very far. You already have the content. It's just about transforming that into a script, if that makes sense. Once you have that,
Well, I think,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead, sorry.
No, I think you could also take a different angle and be a little bit more strategic. What are the groups that you would like to connect with? So if you have maybe an adoption ladder, maybe you have certain objections that you are aware of. So address those, right? If you know also from the field teams, like, okay, this is an argument that is really mentioned a lot. That could also be interesting content. So it starts obviously with the strategy from a marketeer is like,
Yeah,
who do I want to connect with and what is my objective, right? What's my
yeah.
marketing objective for this particular webinar or omni-channel campaign or whatever I do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the good thing about KOLs is that they can, because there will probably still be some kind of MLR track here. So you need to be very clear in advance as what can be said, what cannot be said, what can be
Yes.
recorded, what needs to be taken out of the recording, etc. But still, it's going to be an individual making these claims and not the pharma itself, right? So I think that's why it's also a very interesting strategy.
Yeah, I agreed with that. I think we covered all the questions. All right, Maurice, where can we find you online? Where can we find Shaman online? What's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're interested in content production at scale or self-service, a topic like this, potentially modular content, these are all topics that we work with every day. Our website is getshaman.com. And from there, you can just click the button and book a meeting, and we'll happy to meet you and learn about your specific problems and see if we can help you. Jills, I think you're on mute.
Look at that. In French, we say that the shoemaker is the guy that has the worst shoes. Exactly. You know, I'm the one being muted, whereas I was anyway. So as for Livestorm, you can find us online as well, livestorm.co, just like the domain here. And yeah, that's it. Look, thank you, Maurice, for taking the time today, enlightening us with over a decade of experience in the field. That's very useful for me. I learned a couple of things, to be honest. I hope this was useful for you as well on the chat.
Absolutely.
And look, I guess cannot wait to see you in Berlin and or in Amsterdam, actually. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Messages, questions, as per usual. And I'll see you all on the next time.